Let's do the playoff picture because we just got word right before you came on. Ohio State, Michigan gets canceled. Ohio State needs, one more win. The Big Ten, they're not going to tell their cash cow no. I mean, right now it's 3:00 on Tuesday. We just got this news, so don't hold us to it. But if you're the Big Ten, are you in a bind here? Do you feel like?
I think the ADs are meeting on Wednesday, and I think they're going to try to discuss if Barry Alvarez kind of brought it up last week, the AD at Wisconsin. He said, listen, if Ohio State only gets 5 games, we may have to reevaluate this. And he goes, they're our best team, and we make up the rules. Why do we have to sit here and say they can't get in if they only have 5 games? So he kind of brought that up just as a talking point. It wasn't that's what we're doing, but it made everybody in the media think that's what they're doing. So we'll see. The other thing I would throw out as we sit here, I think Ohio State may try to find a game. I don't know other games within the Big Ten. I don't know who's going to cancel. I don't know who's going to be available. I don't know if there's a chance, like you see in the Pac-12, they sometimes shuffle the deck. I don't know if that might happen. Or off the just top of my head, Texas A&M.
I know that's the one.
I'm saying?
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we get a juiced up Coastal Carolina BYU backyard football.
But I mean, the Big Ten, they'd have to say, and the SEC would have to say, hey, we've tried to keep everything in house because of the COVID and restrictions. Mm-hmm. They'd have to be willing to open up.
But Ohio State has a lot more to lose there. So
absolutely.
Although
it really, to me,
thinks they can win that game.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, they still have their COVID restrictions. They lost 3 starting offensive linemen. Their starting middle linebacker, who's a 4-year starting middle linebacker. So they're down some guys. But you're right. It's what do you have to gain versus, to me, what you have to gain is image, PR. Yeah. People look at Ohio State and the SEC like they're overrated. Here's a chance to go out and say, okay, even with guys down, we'll play anybody. Let's go play. That's one side. And the other side is it worth the risk? Because chances are they're going to clear them to go to Indianapolis even at 5, and you still get a chance to be a Big Ten champion, even though 6 games, you still got a shot to get into the playoff, in a crazy year like this. So I don't know what they'll end up doing. I think they'll try to stay in-house first in the Big Ten and see if they can find another game.
What kind of loss would it take for the Big Ten to look like they have egg on their face on this thing?
The only way, if this plays out and they don't get a game this week, they go to Indianapolis, they play Northwestern. For argument's sake, if they win that game, they're sitting there at 6-0, and they're crowned Big Ten champs. We got Notre Dame and Clemson, and we got Alabama and Florida. If Clemson beats Notre Dame, and Florida were to somehow beat Alabama with Kyle Trask, then you have an interesting scenario there. Then you have Notre Dame and Clemson, in my mind, would both be in. I think Florida's a lock. And then I think you're sitting there debating 6-0 Ohio State versus whatever, Alabama 11-1 or whatever they would be. I think it's 6 games. I don't know if that's enough, even if you're a Big Ten champ. Alabama's been so good for this entire year through all this. I would think that Alabama would probably go ahead of them. You know what I'm saying? So that's where you end up potentially. Now, if Alabama wins, and it doesn't even matter what happens in Clemson and Notre Dame, Florida would be out. I think Ohio State would still probably end up going. So I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you're a huge Alabama fan right now.
So with the trilogy here, the possible trilogy, we got Clemson, Notre Dame. So with the guys that Clemson was missing, because here's the thing about Clemson. I watched this backup quarterback play. Fucking guy doesn't look like a backup to me. Right. Nobody at Clemson looks like backup. So how am I supposed to gauge how different this matchup would be? I think it'd be a thriller again, but what would you make the line for that game?
With everybody Clemson has coming back on a neutral site, not that it's, actually Notre Dame had fans. I mean, it was actually a decent atmosphere. I would guess Clemson. I'm going to guess Felica, the Bear, would be way better at this.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess Clemson by 4.
Yeah, I was going to say 5. Okay, that makes me feel good. I'll probably pick the wrong side of that. So I set the line and then pick the wrong side. I got a show with Stanford Steve every week, so I'll see what Steve has to say.
Oh yeah. Ask him, and he'll get his info from Bear. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to give defense some love because we live in an era of offense. Everybody talked about Trevor Lawrence not being there. But they have a 3 technique named Tyler Davis. He's number 13, who's going to be a great pro. And they got a guy in the middle, James Skalski, who has started 40-some games at middle backer. He's the glue. You ever watch Brent Venables going crazy? He's the guy that just makes it all right.
Football machine. He's your James Laurinaitis type.
Yeah, exactly. You got 13 and 47 in the middle that didn't go to South Bend, didn't play. And then you got an outside backer who's replacing Isaiah Simmons, a guy named Mike Jones, who's been around. So 3 really, really talented, experienced players. They returned 4 starters from last year, and they had 3 of them that weren't able to play in that game. So that to me is probably even bigger than Trevor Lawrence coming back because of the job that DJ did in that game. I think he threw for 400 yards or something against the Notre Dame defense.
Before I get to your Commonwealth Cup, and we got a lot of listeners in Virginia, but not all our listeners in Virginia. They'll have to suffer through that for a second. But how much error is between, for these NFL teams that are going to pick in the middle of the first round or at the bottom of the top 10 who might need a quarterback? How much error is there really between? I think we do this thing where we assume. We did it last year with Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert, he just doesn't have what it takes. It's going to be developmental.
Yeah.
I saw him at the combine. He couldn't hit the broadside of the barn.
Right.
How does that happen? And how much error is there between 1, 2, and 3 right now with Trask, on the back end of that trio?
Trask, I'll just start with him. He is limited physically, but knows his limitations. And Dan Mullen's scheme, it's all about timing, accuracy, decision making. He's a 10 out of 10 in those 3 areas. So I'm trying to think. I don't know who an NFL quarterback off the top of my head he reminds me of, but I'll be interested to see. You better have the right scheme in mind when it comes to him. Like Trevor Lawrence will stand at the right hash and you can run a 20-yard out and he's going to throw a laser.
Yeah.
He's got, you know what I mean? He's got that
quarterback you notice. I used to watch football and never noticed the quarterback, but now that I'm working in football, just kind of falling in love with watching guys like Justin Herbert. It's when it looks different coming off the ball.
100%. Yeah.
It just looks different. And it looks different for Herbert too.
And that's how he is. I think because of the way the NFL is going and what we talked about earlier, I think Justin Fields is much closer to Trevor Lawrence than maybe most analysts think. I think most analysts say it's Trevor, drop, and then you have these other quarterbacks. See, to me, by the time they draft these quarterbacks and they do all their workouts, I think it'll be a 1A, 1B. So I don't know who's going to need a quarterback. I assume the Jets. You mentioned Darnold moving on. Mm-hmm. There's always assumptions that Trevor's going to go to New York. I don't know who that 2, 3, 4. But I think Justin Fields, the guy can make every throw. He's dynamic athletically. He can create. He's really worked a lot working through progressions, so he can sit in the pocket and actually work through it. So I think he's a lot closer. And then I think there's a drop. And then I think it's a debate. Is it going to be Trask? Is it going to be Zach Wilson at BYU? Right. The kid at North Dakota State? There's a lot of guys that might be in that next tier.
The kid at North Dakota State, he could be real rangy where he could be one of those real late risers and you'd be, how the hell did they pick him this high? I don't know.
I know.
Real quick, Harbaugh prediction. Does he stay? Does he go? And how interested do you think he really is in going back? I mean, I'm hearing reports that he is really interested in the pro game.
You know this better than probably me. The coaches trying to get into the mind of Jim Harbaugh. Anybody who reports,
good luck. That's mind of anyways.
Anybody who reports anything is simply speculating. Mm-hmm. There's no inside scoop. Jim Harbaugh doesn't provide that. Maybe other than maybe to his family. So I have no idea. I personally love him in college. Like I grew up when he was a player at Michigan, and Ohio State and Michigan would have great rivalry games. And when I see him, I still see him in number 4 at Michigan. And so for him to be the Michigan coach, I said this when he went there, I would have thought it'd be going like this right now. I mean, it'd be like.
So would I. I was in the NFC West. I knew how good those teams were. I just
and you tell me, how does he do what he did at San Francisco, and then things are not going the same way in college?
He had a lot of talent on defense. Okay, that defense was like ridiculous name to name. And, you had the Kaepernick thing that fell into his lap. Actually, the game that Cap comes in, it was Jolon Dunbar knocked out Alex Smith on the near sideline. I was pursuing that play 2 yards away. Next play, this tall, lanky kid comes in and lights us up, and we end up tying the game. That was the beginning of Kaepernick, and I think that year, that infusion of something new, where people didn't have any tape on him or anything, was like, it was just the perfect storm for them.
I see.
And I also think there's no denying it. He's a heck of a football coach, and the game's change. Whenever people talk about how much the game's changed, I always go back immediately to that O-line in San Francisco. I probably talk about it on the podcast once every 2 weeks. Iupati, Staley, all the listeners know the whole line by now. Frank Gore, Delaney Walker, and Vernon Davis in a big wing, and they run power and counter. So I don't know if it's an issue of, I don't think it's a recruiting issue because, people like him. He's kind of a celebrity, right? But has it become a thing where Michigan being down and Penn State being down is allowing like an Indiana to slide in and be a long-term kind of 1B?
I think Penn State's a blip on the radar.
You think Penn State's going to be right back up?
Yep. I think that.
Yeah.
I think if you look at that Penn State roster, you see NFL ability on that roster. Right now at Michigan, man, there's some here and there, but when Michigan was Michigan, they recruited really well in Ohio and in Chicago, and they'd go down to Florida, they'd go into Texas, they'd even go to California, and they'd bring, a lot of talent onto the roster. When Lloyd Carr had it roll in, or even before that, Bo, that was how they did it. And when you look at a Michigan roster right now, it's Connecticut, Rhode Island. It's really bizarre.
Is that intentional by him? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's just a different approach. So when you say it's Michigan, they got to have talent. They have some talent.
Yeah.
But when you put them on the field with Alabama in a bowl game, whoa, you see a noticeable difference.
Different sport.
A noticeable difference in skill. You put them on the field with Ohio State the last whatever years, there's a big difference in the skill spots, So I don't know. Notre Dame's winning right now with 3 tight ends and offensive linemen and pounding people. So
it's crazy.
You can still do it, but for whatever reason, maybe this is the worst, obviously, it's been. Maybe COVID and all the restrictions and everything they've been, maybe it's holding them back. But I personally hope I hope he stays in college. But I know if he moves on, he'd have an NFL job.
Yeah, he probably
blink
would.
of an eye.